Picture this. You've just sold everything you own. Your family thinks you're insane. You're about to walk 2,000 miles across a continent filled with hostile terrain, deadly diseases, and uncertain fate. Why? Because someone found a shiny rock in a California river, and now the entire world has gone mad with gold fever. This isn't fiction. This is 1849. And over 300,000 people are about to make the most dangerous gamble of their lives. Welcome to the story of the 49ers. The men and women who didn't just change California, they transformed it from a sleepy Spanish outpost into a roaring, chaotic, lawless land of opportunity in less than a decade. A transformation that took other civilizations 500 years happened here in the blink of an eye. Today, we're diving deep into Stuart Edward White's masterful chronicle of the California Trail and the El Dorado dream that lured thousands to their fortune or their doom. This is a story of courage, greed, survival, death, vigilante justice, and the birth of modern California. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear will change how you see American history forever. Before the madness, there was silence. Before the 49ers, there was Spanish California, a land so remote, so forgotten, that it might as well have been on another planet. For centuries, California existed as a fantasy in European minds. After Spanish conquistadors looted the treasure cities of the Aztecs and Incas, they dreamed of finding more golden kingdoms along the Pacific coast. But after early explorations revealed no cities of gold, no massive civilizations to plunder, Spain lost interest. California became an afterthought, a distant frontier nobody particularly wanted. That changed in the late 18th century when political necessity forced Spain's hand. Worried about Russian expansion from Alaska and British interest from Canada, Spain decided they needed to claim California, not for its wealth, but simply to keep it away from their rivals. Enter the missionaries. Spain's tried and tested weapon of colonization wasn't military conquest. It was religious conversion. In 1769, the Sacred Expedition led by Father Junipero Serra and Captain Gaspar de Portola established a chain of missions along the California coast. These missions would become the romanticized golden age that tourists still admire today, those beautiful, crumbling structures surrounded by modern cities. But let's be clear, Spanish California was never the romantic paradise of legend. The society was feudal, inefficient, and stagnant. The Spanish government failed to develop agriculture or industry. Their forts were armed with ornamental brass cannons mounted on rotted carriages, some pointing at the planet Venus rather than any actual threat. One observer noted that if these cannons were ever fired, they'd probably send their cannonballs to startle the people on the other side of the hemisphere. The population was tiny, just a few thousand Spanish colonists, missionaries, and indigenous peoples living in a vast, undeveloped territory. Life moved slowly, gracefully even, but without purpose or direction. California was sleeping, waiting for something to wake it up. That wake-up call came with the Americans. By the 1840s, Americans had begun trickling into California. These weren't conquistadors or missionaries. They were trappers, traders, farmers, and adventurers following the Oregon Trail westward. The journey itself was brutal. Starting from Independence, Missouri, immigrants faced 2,000 miles of prairie, mountains, deserts, and uncertainty. The trail took them up the Platte River, across South Pass in the Rocky Mountains, to Fort Hall in present-day Idaho. There, the trail split north of Oregon or southwest California through the deadly Nevada desert and over the towering Sierra Nevada mountains. Many didn't make it. Disease, starvation, accidents, and exposure claimed hundreds of lives. But those who survived found something unexpected in California. John Sutter's Fort, located at the junction of the American and Sacramento rivers. Captain John Sutter was a Swiss immigrant with grand ambitions. Some say he dreamed of creating his own independent nation within California. He was a short, thick-set man with military bearing and old-fashioned courtesy, known for his generosity to weary travelers. Sutter's Fort became the first stop for immigrants who had just survived crossing the Sierras. It was a place of rest, resupply, and hospitality. Sutter welcomed these Americans with open arms, never suspecting that his kindness would ultimately lead to his own destruction. By 1845, approximately 700 Americans lived in California. The Mexican government, which had won independence from Spain, was nervous about this growing American presence. They weren't wrong to worry. In 1846, war broke out between the United States and Mexico. When the smoke cleared, California belonged to America. But California was still a backwater. San Francisco was a tiny settlement called Yerba Buena, with perhaps 200 inhabitants. Monterey was the capital, a sleepy port town where nothing much happened. California was American now, but it was still sleeping. Then came January 24th, 1848. James Marshall was building a sawmill for John Sutter along the American River when he spotted something glinting in the water. He picked it up. It was gold, pure gold. Marshall and Sutter tried to keep it secret. They knew that discovery of gold would bring chaos, that it would destroy the peaceful agricultural empire Sutter was building. They were absolutely right, and absolutely powerless to stop what came next. Word leaked out. At first, locals didn't believe it. But as more evidence surfaced, skepticism turned to certainty, and certainty turned to frenzy. By mid-1848, San Francisco had essentially emptied out as every able-bodied person rushed to the gold fields. Ships arrived in the harbor and were immediately abandoned by their crews. Stores closed. Businesses failed. Entire towns depopulated overnight. But that was just the beginning. When news reached the east coast of the United States in late 1848, it sparked the most dramatic mass migration in American history. When the news reached Europe, Asia, South America, and Australia, it became a global phenomenon. These were the 49ers, named for the year 1849, when the gold rush truly exploded. They came from everywhere. New England farmers, Southern plantation owners, Midwestern merchants, European peasants, Chinese laborers, Mexican miners, Chilean sailors, and Australian adventurers. All of them had one thing in common. They believed California was their ticket to instant wealth. They had 3 ways to get there, and each route was a nightmare in its own way. The overland route was the cheapest option, which made it the most popular. All you needed was a wagon, some supplies, oxen or mules, and the willingness to walk 2,000 miles through some of the most punishing terrain on earth. The trail started in Independence, Missouri, or one of the other jumping-off towns along the Missouri River. In the spring of 1849, these towns became chaotic staging grounds for tens of thousands of emigrants. The streets were clogged with wagons, livestock, and desperate people trying to buy supplies that became more expensive by the day. Most emigrants had no idea what they were doing. City people who'd never camped a day in their lives suddenly found themselves responsible for driving ox teams across the prairie. They overpacked their wagons with furniture, tools, food, and sentimental items they'd have to abandon within weeks as the reality of the journey set in. The trail was littered with discarded belongings, pianos, stoves, books, furniture, all thrown away to lighten the load. Later travelers followed a trail marked by the possessions of those who came before and by the graves. So many graves. Disease was the biggest killer. Cholera swept through the wagon trains with devastating speed. A person could wake up healthy and be dead by nightfall. Families buried loved ones in shallow graves along the trail and had to keep moving. There was no time for proper mourning. The living envied the dead because at least their suffering had ended. Then came the terrain. The Great Plains seemed endless, flat, monotonous, exhausting. The Rocky Mountains were formidable but crossable. But after Fort Hall, when the trail turned toward California, came the true test, the Nevada desert. This was hell on earth. Alkali dust burned eyes and throats. Water sources were scarce and often poisoned. Temperatures soared during the day and plummeted at night. Oxen collapsed and died. Wagons broke down. People went mad from thirst and exhaustion. Those who survived the desert faced one final obstacle, the Sierra Nevada mountains. These towering granite walls seemed impossible to cross, especially for emigrants weakened by months of hardship. Some made it, others didn't. The most famous failure was the Donner Party in 1846. Trapped by early snow in the high passes, they resorted to cannibalism to survive. Their story haunted later emigrants and added to the terror of the crossing. But despite everything, the disease, the death, the desert, the mountains, they kept coming. 40,000 people crossed the Overland Trail in 1849 alone. More followed in 1850, 1851, and beyond. They came because the alternative, staying home, working regular jobs, living ordinary lives, seemed worse than risking everything for a chance at fortune. One group played a crucial but often overlooked role in the overland migration. The Mormons, after being driven from their homes in Missouri and Illinois, the Latter-day Saints had established a new Zion in the Salt Lake Valley, Utah, in 1847. They wanted isolation, peace, and a chance to practice their religion without persecution. What they got was a front row seat to the gold rush. The California Trail passed directly through Mormon territory. At first, the Mormon leadership worried that the flood of gold seekers would corrupt their community. But Brigham Young, the pragmatic leader of the Mormons, saw an opportunity. The Saints needed money to build their new society. The emigrants needed food, supplies, repairs, and rest. Salt Lake City became a crucial resupply point on the trail. Mormons sold fresh vegetables, repaired wagons, shod horses, and provided basic hospitality for a price. Some emigrants complained about the cost, but they paid anyway because they had no choice. The Mormons profited handsomely from the gold rush without ever mining an ounce of gold. Some Mormons even served as guides, leading wagon trains through the dangerous territory west of Salt Lake. They knew the land, they knew where water could be found, and they knew how to survive. For many immigrants, hiring a Mormon guide meant the difference between life and death. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The religious group that America had persecuted and expelled now held the key to California's Golden Gate. If you had money and couldn't stomach the idea of a 6-month overland trek, there was another option. Sail to Panama, cross the isthmus, and catch another ship to San Francisco. On paper, this seemed easier. In reality, it was just a different kind of hell. The first leg, sailing from New York or Boston to the Caribbean coast of Panama, was uncomfortable but manageable. The second leg, crossing the Panamanian Isthmus, was a fever-soaked nightmare. The Panama Railroad didn't exist yet in 1849. Instead, travelers had to navigate up the Chagres River in small boats, then cross the remaining distance by mule or on foot through dense jungle. The heat was oppressive, the humidity was suffocating, and the diseases, yellow fever, malaria, cholera, dysentery, killed travelers by the hundreds. Panama City on the Pacific side became a bottleneck. Thousands of gold seekers arrived, only to find that there weren't enough ships to San Francisco. People waited for weeks or months in crowded, unsanitary conditions. Disease spread rapidly. Many died waiting for passage that never came. Those who did secure passage often found themselves on overcrowded, unseaworthy vessels. Some ships sank. Others took months to reach San Francisco when they should have taken weeks. Passengers ran out of food and water. Fights broke out. Some people died within sight of California, so close to their destination, yet unable to reach it. But when they finally arrived in San Francisco, what they found there, San Francisco in 1849, was unlike anything the world had ever seen. A settlement of 200 people in 1846 exploded into a city of 25,000 by 1849 and 50,000 by 1850. This wasn't gradual urban development. This was spontaneous combustion. Ships arriving in the harbor were immediately abandoned. Captains, crews, and passengers all rushed to the gold fields, leaving hundreds of vessels rotting at anchor. Eventually, these abandoned ships were converted into stores, hotels, and warehouses. Some were even dragged ashore and incorporated into buildings. You could walk down a San Francisco street and enter a store that was actually the hull of a sailing ship. The city was chaos. There were no streets, just muddy pathways. There were no proper buildings, just tents and shacks thrown together from whatever materials were available. Prices were insane. A single egg cost $1, equivalent to about $30 today. A simple meal could cost $20. Everything was scarce except gold and desperation. Gambling halls, saloons, and brothels dominated the city. Violence was common. Theft was rampant. There was no effective law enforcement, no functional government, no social structure. San Francisco was a gold rush boomtown operating under one rule: every man for himself. And yet, there was energy here, creativity, possibility. People from every nation and culture mixed together. Languages from around the world filled the air. Fortunes were made and lost overnight. Today's dishwasher could be tomorrow's millionaire, and yesterday's millionaire could be today's beggar. The city burned repeatedly. San Francisco had no proper fire department, and most buildings were made of wood and canvas. A single spark could engulf entire neighborhoods. The city burned in 1849, again in 1850, multiple times in 1851. Each time, San Franciscans rebuilt, usually bigger and bolder than before. Most 49ers didn't come to San Francisco to stay. They came to get rich in the gold fields. What they found there shattered many dreams. The early miners, those who arrived in 1848 or early 1849, did find gold easily. You could pick nuggets out of streams with your bare hands. Some men made thousands of dollars in a single day. These stories fueled the gold rush frenzy. But by late 1849, the easy gold was gone. What remained required hard, back-breaking labor. Miners stood in icy mountain streams for hours, panning for tiny flakes of gold. They dug shafts into hillsides, hauled dirt and rock, and processed tons of material for ounces of gold. The mining camps were brutal places. Men lived in tents or crude cabins. Food was expensive and often scarce. Beans, bacon, and bread were staples. Fresh vegetables were rare luxuries. Scurvy, caused by vitamin C deficiency, was common. So were accidents. Cave-ins, falling rocks, and drowning killed miners regularly. And then there was the violence. Mining camps attracted criminals, con artists, and desperados. Disputes over claims led to fights, shootings, and murders. There was no law except what the miners enforced themselves. Miners' courts dispensed rough justice, sometimes fair, sometimes not. Most 49ers never struck it rich. They worked themselves into exhaustion for modest returns. They spent their earnings on overpriced supplies. They got sick, got injured, or got discouraged and went home. Or they died from disease, accident, or violence, and were buried in unmarked graves and forgotten camps. But some did succeed. Some found their bonanzas and returned home wealthy. Others didn't find gold but found opportunity. They became merchants, suppliers, freighters, or businessmen serving the mining community. The real money, many discovered, wasn't in mining gold but in selling to miners. Fire was San Francisco's eternal curse. The city burned on Christmas Eve, 1849. It burned again in May 1850, and again in June, and September. By 1851, San Francisco had experienced 6 major fires, each one devastating, each one followed by frantic rebuilding. Why did the city keep burning? Several reasons. First, most buildings were wooden, canvas, or paper-thin construction thrown up in days. Second, there was no professional fire department, just volunteer brigades that were often ineffective. Third, arson. Many fires were deliberately set by criminals who would loot buildings during the chaos or by property owners seeking insurance money. The fire of May 1851 was particularly catastrophic. It started near Portsmouth Square and quickly spread to the heart of the city. Strong winds drove the flames through block after block. People fled with whatever they could carry. Some didn't escape. The fire killed several people and left thousands homeless. Each fire revealed something about San Francisco's character. After every disaster, instead of abandoning the city, San Franciscans rebuilt bigger and better. They started using brick and iron instead of wood. They organized better fire brigades. They improved water supply systems. But the fires also revealed the city's darker side. Looting was rampant during fires. Criminals took advantage of the chaos. Some of the arsonists were members of criminal gangs who deliberately burned the city for profit. This criminality, this sense that San Francisco was being destroyed from within by a criminal element more dangerous than any fire, led to one of the most dramatic episodes in California history. By 1851, San Francisco's patience had run out. The city was being terrorized by organized criminal gangs, particularly the Sydney Ducks, criminals transported from Australia who had formed a powerful underworld organization. They committed robbery, assault, arson, and murder with impunity because the official justice system was either corrupt or incompetent. When a popular merchant named C.J. Jansen was attacked and robbed his store, something snapped. Leading citizens decided that if the government couldn't protect them, they'd protect themselves. In June 1851, they formed the Committee of Vigilance, essentially a citizen militia dedicated to cleaning up the city. The vigilantes didn't mess around. Within days, they arrested, tried, and hanged John Jenkins, an Australian criminal caught stealing a safe. The execution was public and deliberate, a message that a new power was in charge. More arrests followed. The vigilantes established headquarters, organized patrols, and essentially created a parallel government. They arrested dozens of suspected criminals, held trials in their own courts, and imposed their own sentences. Several more men were hanged. Many others were deported, forced onto ships leaving California forever. The official authorities were powerless. The vigilantes had popular support and overwhelming numbers. Governor John McDougall opposed them, but couldn't stop them. Some people criticized the vigilantes for bypassing legal processes, but most San Franciscans supported them because they were effective. By September 1851, the vigilantes declared their work complete and disbanded. Crime dropped dramatically. Arson decreased. San Francisco felt safer. The vigilantes had succeeded where the government had failed. But the story wasn't over. The forces that created the vigilantes, corruption, crime, ineffective government, hadn't disappeared. They'd just gone underground, waiting for another opportunity. The early 1850s saw San Francisco transform from a chaotic gold rush boomtown into something resembling a real city. Brick buildings replaced wooden shacks. Proper streets were laid out and planked over the mud. Theaters opened, offering culture and entertainment. Churches were built, providing spiritual and social centers. Schools opened, serving the growing population of families. The city developed institutions. Banks emerged to handle the flow of gold. Newspapers proliferated, providing news and shaping public opinion. Professional fire departments replaced volunteer brigades. Police forces were established and expanded, but progress brought new problems. Political corruption flourished as politicians and criminals formed alliances. Ballot stuffing, voter intimidation, and bribery were common. Officials appointed by political machines rather than merit-filled government positions. Tax money disappeared into private pockets. Some businessmen and politicians grew wealthy through these corrupt practices, while ordinary citizens grew frustrated watching their city government fail. The legal system was particularly compromised. Criminals with the right connections could escape justice, while innocent people without influence could be railroaded. Meanwhile, California itself was changing. The gold rush was slowing down. The easy gold was gone. Mining was becoming industrialized, requiring expensive equipment and corporate investment rather than individual prospectors. Many miners gave up and returned home or moved into other occupations. But California's population had permanently increased. Cities were established throughout the gold country. Agriculture began to flourish as miners turned farmers discovered that California's climate and soil were perfect for crops. The state was developing an economy beyond gold mining. Yet San Francisco remained the heart of California, the commercial and cultural center. And in San Francisco, the old problems were festering, growing worse, building toward an explosion that would make 1851's vigilante movement look like a rehearsal. By 1855, San Francisco was once again in crisis. The city government was thoroughly corrupt, controlled by political bosses who used their power for personal enrichment. The most notorious was David Broderick, a political machine operator who controlled appointments, distributed patronage, and manipulated elections. Crime had resurged. Street gangs terrorized neighborhoods. Robbery and assault were common. Murders went unsolved. The police were either incompetent or in league with criminals. Judges were bought. Juries were intimidated or bribed. Justice was a joke. But the final straw came in November 1855 when Charles Cora, a gambler, shot and killed U.S. Marshal William Richardson in a dispute. Cora was arrested and tried, but the trial ended in a hung jury, clearly the result of jury tampering. Cora remained in jail awaiting retrial, but everyone knew he'd eventually walk free. Then, in May 1856, James Casey, a corrupt supervisor and newspaper editor, shot and killed James King of William, the crusading editor of the Daily Evening Bulletin, who had been exposing political corruption. King had specifically targeted Casey, revealing that he was an ex-convict from New York Sing Sing prison. Casey turned himself in and was jailed alongside Charles Cora. Both men had powerful friends in the political establishment who assured them they'd be protected. They were wrong. James King of Williams shooting galvanized San Francisco. This wasn't just another crime. This was an attack on freedom of the press, on the right to speak truth to power. King was enormously popular, a hero to ordinary citizens who saw him as their champion against corruption. As King lay dying, thousands of San Franciscans gathered in the streets. The old Vigilance Committee members from 1851 met and decided to reconstitute their organization. This time, they'd be bigger, better organized, and more thorough. The Committee of Vigilance of 1856 enrolled thousands of members. Estimates range from 6,000 to 8,000 men. They organized into military-style companies with uniforms and weapons. They built Fort Gunnybags, a headquarters fortified to withstand attack. They were essentially creating a parallel government with its own army. On May 14, 1856, James King died of his wounds. The vigilantes moved immediately. They surrounded the jail, demanded the release of Casey and Cora, and overcame the weak resistance of the authorities. The vigilantes took both prisoners to Fort Gunnybags. Trials were held, orderly, thorough, but with predetermined outcomes. Casey was convicted of murder. Cora was convicted of murder. On May 22nd, both men were hanged from the windows of Fort Gunnybags as thousands watched. But the vigilantes weren't done. Over the following months, they arrested dozens more men accused of crimes or corruption. Some were hanged. Many more were deported, forced onto ships with orders never to return. The vigilantes cleaned house, purging San Francisco of its criminal element. Governor J. Neely Johnson opposed the vigilantes and tried to suppress them. He declared San Francisco under martial law and called for federal troops. But President Franklin Pierce refused to intervene, and the state militia couldn't match the vigilantes' numbers. The governor was powerless. The vigilantes operated openly for 3 months, imposing their authority across the city. They became San Francisco's effective government. Only when they were satisfied that they'd accomplished their goals did they disband in August 1856, marching through the streets in a massive parade before dissolving their organization. The Vigilance Committee of 1856 left a complex legacy. In one sense, they succeeded brilliantly. Crime dropped dramatically. Political corruption decreased. Many of the worst elements in San Francisco were gone, dead, deported, or frightened into better behavior. The city became safer and more orderly, but they also set a disturbing precedent. A private organization had superseded the government, arrested citizens, held trials without legal authority, and executed people outside the established justice system. This was technically mob rule, even if it was organized, disciplined mob rule with popular support. Critics argued that the vigilantes were dangerous, that they undermined democracy and the rule of law. What happens when citizens decide they can ignore the government whenever they disagree with its performance? Where does that end? If the vigilantes could hang criminals, could they hang political opponents? Could they target unpopular minorities? Could anyone be safe? Supporters countered that the vigilantes had saved San Francisco. The government had failed completely. Citizens had a right, even a duty, to protect themselves when the state couldn't or wouldn't. The vigilantes had acted reluctantly, only after exhausting other options, and had disbanded as soon as their work was complete. The truth probably lies somewhere between these extremes. The vigilantes were a response to genuine crisis, but their methods were problematic. They succeeded in their immediate goals, but the long-term implications were troubling. What undeniable is that the vigilantes represented something uniquely Californian, a frontier willingness to take matters into your own hands, to bypass established institutions when they failed, to create order from chaos through collective action. This was California in 1856, barely a decade removed from Spanish rule, less than 10 years American, transformed by gold from empty wilderness to thriving society, still raw, still dangerous, still figuring out what kind of place it wanted to be. So what happened to all these 49ers? What became of the hundreds of thousands who crossed deserts and oceans chasing the El Dorado dream? Some struck it rich and returned home wealthy. Most didn't. Many died along the trail or in the mining camps, their graves unmarked and forgotten. Others gave up on gold but stayed in California, becoming farmers, merchants, craftsmen, builders of the new state. John Sutter, the generous host who welcomed the first American immigrants, died impoverished. The gold rush destroyed his empire. Squatters took his land. His workers abandoned him for the gold fields. He spent his final years petitioning Congress for compensation he never received, a bitter end for California's most hospitable pioneer. California itself was transformed beyond recognition. The sleepy Spanish province became America's 31st state in 1850. The population exploded from about 14,000 in 1848 to over 300,000 by 1855. San Francisco grew from a village into one of America's great cities. But more than demographics changed. California developed a distinct character, a unique culture shaped by the gold rush experience. It was a place where anyone could reinvent themselves, where yesterday's identity didn't matter, where the future was more important than the past. It was entrepreneurial, risk-taking, sometimes lawless, always dynamic. The California we know today, innovative, diverse, prosperous, complicated, was born in those frantic years of 1849 to 1856. The 49ers didn't just discover gold. They created a new kind of American society, one that still influences our culture today. Stewart Edward White captured this transformation brilliantly in his chronicle, reminding us that great historical changes are made by ordinary people taking extraordinary risks, that civilization can be built in chaos, and that sometimes the journey itself matters more than whether you find gold at the end. Here's something to ponder. If you lived in 1849 and heard about the California gold rush, would you go? Would you risk everything, your life, your family, your security, for a chance at fortune? Would you walk 2,000 miles through deadly terrain, or sail around Cape Horn into storms, or across disease-infested Panama? It's easy to say no from our comfortable modern perspective, but what if staying home meant a life of poverty or drudgery? What if that gold really could change everything for you and everyone you loved? What if your only chance at a better life was waiting on the other side of that desert, beyond those mountains, in a place called California? The 49ers faced this choice. 300,000 people said yes. Would you? Think about it. And while you're thinking, make sure you subscribe to this channel. We're diving deep into history's greatest stories, the ones that show us who we are and how we got here. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join us for the next journey through time. Because history isn't just about what happened. It's about understanding why people made the choices they made and what those choices mean for us today. Thanks for listening. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning. And